Um, and okay, so I'm just going to go back a little bit and talk a little bit about Das Critique, which started in 2014. And it really started as it started in Goa. And it started from the idea that Goa has always been a kind of crossroads, a kind of place where people come to meet. Not obviously, not, from far before it was a sort of tourist destination, partly because, from the Portuguese times, because different communities, people from across the world would come to meet in Goa. I was actually reminded of this because, this week is Thanksgiving and millions of turkeys are going to be slaughtered across the world. And the first turkeys in India actually came to Goa. And we actually know this because there's actually a fascinating record of this, because the Emperor Jahangir, the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, actually sent people to Goa because he knew curiosities from across the world came to Goa. And one of the things they got in Goa was a turkey. And he was so fascinated by it that he got his court artist, Ustad Mansoor, to make a really wonderful miniature of the turkeys, which is actually one of the most striking Mughal miniatures. Anyway, so my point is, Goa has always been a crossroads, and Das Critique, Nilankur, Reggie, and others who joined in later, like Alok, decided, it would be great to bring all these conversations together in one place and start dialogues. And it actually started, and this is nice for a session that's going to be a lot about food, in a restaurant, in Gunpowder Restaurant, which was closed on Mondays, and they gave the premises for talks and discussions. And you saw a few slides just now of those discussions, and it was fantastic. And when COVID hit, I mean, everybody thought this was going to be the end of such sessions. But then we realized, as with so many other people, that we could actually go online and open up the sessions hugely, and which is what has happened. And that's why we've been able to get somebody like Devdutt to come and talk with us today, which is amazing. Thanks very much for that. And as I said, the discussion started about Goa, went global. It still retains Goan links, and there are one or two links in today's conversation which I'll bring up as we go along. I'll just say a little bit that, this is all done voluntarily, but it does have a few expenses, and if anybody can contribute, you can go to the website and you'll get the links on how you can contribute anything to allow these sessions to continue. Okay, so let's come down to today's session, which is about called Nourished by the Jungle, Feeding Mythology. And this session really started from the fact that Devdutt and I are really old friends, and we've been having conversations going back over years. Whenever I have queries to do with mythology, I call him, and he always finds time to explain things to me. And sometimes he has questions on food, which he calls me about. And we just thought we'd take this discussion online, which is what's going to happen today. Now, the one thing I've really understood from these sessions, from our past talks, that is how fundamental food is to Indian mythology, to Indian thinking. And I'd like you first to talk a little bit about this before we get lost in the jungle.
So, when you talk about Indian philosophy, we have heard this famous line, right? Desire is the cause of suffering, and Buddha has said that. But the word desire is not found in Buddhist literature. It is not there in Pali. In Pali, the word is tanna. Tanna means tanha, thirst. It's a very physiological word which is used. Desire is a very sophisticated, refined, secondary, tertiary meaning of the word. But Buddha uses a very organic word that anybody would understand. Thirst. Life is we are full of yearning, desires, and he uses the word thirst. Hindu mythology uses the word hunger, the hunger of the gods. And therefore, when you go to the temple, you go to give food to the gods, naivedya, bhog. So everything revolves around food. Though I think people requesting Hindi, तो मैं अंग्रेजी हिंदी दोनों में मिक्स करके बात करूंगा. तो भोग जब होगा, तो भोग नहीं होता है, तो देवताओं को हम भोग देते हैं. So भोग is a central theme in Indian thought. भोग के बिना कुछ नहीं होता है, पूजा नहीं होता है, यज्ञ नहीं होता है. Everything is about भोग. So I'm surprised when I read books.
How is this different from other traditions?
So, for example, you pray in Christianity, right? You pray. आप नमाज पढ़ते हो. या आप church, when you go to the church, you are praying. The food, although there is this concept of thou shalt eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, it's metaphorical. It's not food. Food doesn't place, although food is across the world, celebrations are related to food. Theology is not associated with food. But in Indian philosophy, the role of food is absolutely central. In fact, Rigved के जितने भी मंत्र हैं, सूक्त हैं, they are primarily invitations to God to eat food.
Okay.
The entire Rigved is a set of invitations. The gods are being called कि आइए हमारे घर आइए और खाना खाइए. So it's an invitation to food. That's how central food is to Indian thought. The gods are always called to eat food.
And what this is because there is an exchange happening, right, between humans and the gods through the medium of food.
Yes, but it's more primal than that. What differentiates the living organism from the non-living thing? Let's go to the basics. Indian thought is always about this basics. So Mahabhuta is the elements. So Agni, Vayu, the elements. But they are ajiva. They're not live. Unme prana nahi hai. What is the difference between the living and the non-living object? The living organism is hungry.
Okay.
So when we speak of Atma, Jiva, living organisms, we are really referring to creatures that are seeking food.
Okay.
That is the difference. A rock is different from a plant because a plant seeks food. A rock doesn't seek food. Fire doesn't seek food. Water doesn't seek food. Minerals don't seek food. The sky doesn't seek food. But a plant seeks food. Animals seek food. Gods seek food. Asuras, ghosts, pretatmas. Pretas are always hungry for food. The pitras, the ancestors are, the bhook lagti hai sabko. Jahan pran hai, jahan jeevan hai, wahan bhook hoti hai. Is exactly what Buddha says. Where there is life, there is suffering. He didn't mean suffering, he meant hunger. Where there is life, there is hunger.
Okay. I'm just going to say that this session is going on YouTube Live, and the link for that is in the chat box at the moment. So, this can be another way people can access this conversation. Okay, now, while I have a general flow for this discussion, the problem with talking to Devdutt is there are so many fascinating little byways that one can go along in what he writes, that I've allowed myself a few select digressions where we can quickly go down one bylane. And one bylane is about Annapurna. We're talking about gods and food, and there is this idea, this icon of the goddess of food,
Yes.
who is shown always with a ladle in her hand. So I want you to talk a little bit about Annapurna and the importance of her ladle.
So Annapurna is Shakti. So she complements Shiva.
Okay.
Shiva is the god who has no hunger. Shivji ko bhook nahi lagti. So the devas are hungry and they come to the Yagyashala for food. So when the yajna is conducted, आप देवताओं को आवाहन देते हो कि आके हमारे यहाँ खाना खाओ. But Shiva is Mahadev because he is not hungry. उसको भूख नहीं लगती तो उनका आवाहन आप नहीं कर सकते. He's not hungry. He's never going to come to you. He's not interested in what you have to offer. So Shiva is Mahadev who is not hungry. The guy who has overcome desire, so to say, which is why he destroys Kama, the god of desire. But his wife, the woman who marries him, who chases him, who says, you will be my husband, is Parvati. And she says she's the goddess of the kitchen, which is ironical. She is the goddess of the kitchen who marries the god who is never hungry. So it's a classic structure in mythology where जिसको भूख नहीं लगती है उसकी जो पत्नी है वो खाना बनाती है. And to make him aware that while he is not hungry, the world is full of hungry creatures. All living creatures, Bhutatma, Pretatma, every living creature is hungry and is going to seek food. And she's making him aware of other people's hunger. So that's it. But the ladle becomes very important because the act of the ladle is used to serve food. So it's not for yours. It's not a spoon to eat. You can't eat with the ladle because the ladle is long, right? So you can't eat with the spoon. So it's not you can't take it like this. You have to feed someone with it. And that is the important ritual in Hinduism of feeding the other.
Okay.
The ladle is used in the yajna also. You're using this long ladle to put ghee in the fire, which is to feed the gods. The mouth of the gods are the fire, and in the fire you're putting ghee and you're parosna. They say parosna. But that ladle in Sanskrit is called uddharane. Uddharane means that which uplifts.
Okay.
So the ladle is in the Vedic yajna, the ladle is called uddharane, that which uplifts you. So you are uplifted by the act of feeding the other.
Okay.
So Annapurna is carrying that ladle and telling you, cook
Okay.
food for others.
Okay.
That's the.
I mean, there are other food goddesses. There is Shakhambari Devi, who is the goddess of vegetable. Where do these goddesses come from? These other goddesses of food?
So they are see, with Annapurna it's very specific. It is the act of making food and serving food. With Shakhambari, she's Shaka, green vegetables. The Shak hai, the vegetables. She's the goddess of vegetables. So unki devata hai wo. Or she is the food that you consume. So Lakshmi is food that you consume. She's not the cook. Annapurna is the cook.
Okay.
Lakshmi is the food itself.
Okay.
The food itself is the goddess. So the one who prepares the food is one goddess. The one who is food is another goddess.
Okay.
So Shakhambari is that goddess. Lakshmi is that goddess. That which is the food itself. Anna. So Anna ek hai aur Annapurna dusri. So they're two different things. And that's what Lakshmi, Annapurna take those forms.
Okay, so now I'm going to come to another goddess, Aranyani, the goddess of the forest. And this is the other theme of our discussion today. And there was a very specific reason why I wanted to talk about the jungle, and it's based on the events of this year. I mean, this year has been an extraordinary year for all of us in many ways. And when the first lockdown happened way back in March, and of course now we are talking about a second lockdown, but when the first lockdown happened, the first total lockdown, I was in Goa, and when everything ceased, it was when we suddenly realized how much a small state like Goa depends on food from outside. I mean, the grain in Goa comes from Maharashtra, the vegetables come from Karnataka, and suddenly with this overnight lockdown, all these things stopped. And people were like, where were we going to get food to eat? And as it happened, that was March and April, just start of summer. And where I live, we have lots of jackfruits around, and there were all these jackfruits on the tree. So actually, we actually climbed the trees and got down the kathal, and I got out a knife and I oiled my hands and I oiled the knife, and I spent some time just cutting up the jackfruits, and it was excellent. The green jackfruit is a great vegetable.
Very good food.
It's also one of the most ancient vegetables in Indian cooking chronicles. I mean, India is remarkable in having some fairly ancient cooking chronicles. One of which is the Super Shastra, which is from I think about the 16th century, and it's a very interesting document because it comes purely by chance at a very particular time, just before the Columbian exchange happens. The Columbian exchange is what in food history is called the time when Columbus and the old world and the new world connect, and this huge exchange of many things, but particularly food happens. And I think it's always a surprise for many people to learn how many foods that are so intrinsic to India actually are from the Americas, and also foods from here go to the Americas. So obviously the ones most people know are chilies and potatoes, but even things like papayas we got from the West. But the Super Shastra is interesting because it comes just before this. So it's a snapshot of what our food systems were like before, just before the Columbian exchange. And the vegetables that it talks about are mostly things like pumpkins, jackfruit. There are many, many recipes for jackfruit, many recipes for banana flour. And you realize that these are, which are now like, vegetables which are marginal or forgotten, were actually critical to India. And what I find really interesting about jackfruit is that jackfruit, which most of us had forgotten about, sometimes you would have katal ki bhaji or katal ki biryani, but most people had forgotten about it, has now suddenly become really big in the West because it's become really taken up by vegans who have realized that the texture. The reason we always cook katal is because the texture, green jackfruit, is because the texture is sort of fibrous and a bit like meats. In Telugu, there's a phrase for it which calls it tree goat, because you can cook it and it's like mutton. And in the West, it's suddenly become taken up as a meat substitute, which is quite fascinating. You can go to New York and you will have to pay huge amounts of money to get like
Healthy sabji.
a jackfruit burger and things like that. Whereas in India, most of us are jackfruits is that horrible smelly thing that most of us just avoid these days. And in the lockdown, actually, we ended up eating a lot of jackfruit. And that's not the only food association. Like again, this year where everything has been happening, we have had locust attacks. And locusts, coming to India after many years reminded me of how, one thing was they used to be called Mahadev Ka Ghoda, so the destruction that came on, but they're also edible. There are many instances where people actually eat locusts. Locusts are kosher, for example. Like it's the only
So in
insect
the
that's kosher.
Bible, the Matthew, Bible, there are a lot of references. जो तपस्वी होते थे Bible में, they eat locusts and honey. Wild locusts and honey is
except David, that is sometimes a reference to locust beans, which are not quite the same thing. I mean, but there are actual references to eating locusts, which
locust beans.
Locust beans are it's a tree which you get which has edible legumes.
Oh.
So some of the biblical references are to that, but some, you're absolutely right, are to actually eating locusts, which are like prawns in a sense. People say they're like winged prawns. So anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. But my point is, suddenly I was reminded with all these incidents that the jungle and the ways of eating from the jungle are actually very close to us. I mean, this was a year when all our elaborate systems of civilization suddenly started getting really strained. And living in Goa, where the jungle is never that far away, you suddenly realize that the jungle is still out there. And it made me think of the many conversations we've had and how you have talked increasingly about the meaning of the jungle in Indian mythology. So first, can you tell us a little bit about that? Then we'll talk about the jungle and food.
See, the first time the jungle is separated from the settlement, so jungle this separation of jungle and cultivated land comes from the Samaved. तो सामवेद में पहले बार आप आरण्यगान और ग्रामगान, तो ग्राम और आरण्य का the separation between grama and aranya comes in the Samaved, and this is the first time you have this very clear division. This is the jungle, wild, where you are nothing is cultivated, and then you have the cultivated garden, the cultivated field. And there are two worlds which emerge, and this recurs. First, it comes in the Samaved, then it starts occurring in the Ramayana and in the Mahabharata. So, Ramayana, Ram goes to the Vanavasa. Then in Mahabharata, the Pandavas are in Aranya. So,
this is so striking that in both our great epics, both the protagonists have to rule long periods in the jungle.
The jungle is, and it's also part of ritual. Jungle ke saath jab aap jate ho, so this whole thing of going to the jungle is this recovery. It's going back to basics, basically, the foundation of your society. And you see, all the gods are associated with forests. So, for example, Hanuman is with Kadali Vana, the forest of bananas. Ganesha is associated with Ikshu Vana, forest of sugarcane. Then you have Shiva with Devdara Vana, cedar wood forest. Then you have Vishnu with Madhubana. So you have Madhubana, Vrindavana, the basil forest.
Wow, so each god has a forest.
Every god has and the goddess has her orchards and groves.
Okay.
Where Goa is famous for these groves where nobody is allowed to enter.
The sacred groves, which nobody goes into. Yeah.
Nobody goes into, and then the famous story in the Mahabharata where when a man enters these groves, he becomes a woman. So your gender changes. Therefore, you're
what's the story? It's a problem with you. The digressions are sometimes more interesting. So quickly tell us that story.
The story of these gods, there is all wherever the goddess का वन होता है, तो वहाँ पे अगर कोई भी पुरुष जाएगा, वो स्त्री बनेगा, क्योंकि वहाँ पे शिव और शक्ति संभोग कर रहे हैं. So this is so Ila goes into the Swadyumna goes into the forest and becomes Ila. He becomes a woman, and then the god Mercury falls in love with her, and they make love, and therefore the whole Chandravansh, the whole lunar dynasty of kings, comes from this queer space.
Yeah. I'm just going to mention here for people who are listening that these groves that Devdutt is talking about still exist just about through the Konkan coast. And I mean, like most of our forest systems, they're being threatened with encroachment. But this sacred status has allowed many of them to survive, and they're actually really important sources of biodiversity. Plants that are being destroyed and are being you can't find anywhere else can still be found in these groves. Sorry, back to you. Yeah.
So that's what. So this is what the role of the forest starts playing very important roles. And the rishis are always in the forest. So when Ram goes to the forest, they are all वो वहाँ पे ऋषि बैठे होते हैं. और ऋषि word means the observer, जो देखता है. And he is observing trees and plants and celestial phenomena, the sun and the moon, and he's commenting on botany, zoology. So that is Indian thought. जब हम philosophy की बात करते हैं, Indian ज्ञान की बात करते हैं, तो we are really talking about these gods who are associated with plants and animals, birds. Everything in Indian literature is related around the organic, the inorganic, botany, zoology, and then of course the food, the processing of it. Because वो प्रकृति से संस्कृति तक जब आती है, तो जो पक्का खाना, what is called पक्का खाना, is about cooking. जब आग लगती है उसको, when it is processed with fire, and therefore in India that hot food is very important, the sacred, because you have energized the food. So cold food is not appreciated. It is always hot food which is appreciated. It represents civilization. आज भी किसी के घर में जाओ तो घर में गरम खाना नहीं है, या परोसने वाला कोई नहीं है. अगर परोसने वाला कोई नहीं है, गरम खाना नहीं है, तो मतलब संस्कृति नहीं है तुम्हारे घर में. So the concept of this, the kitchen coming into the picture. I strongly believe that the kitchen fire was the first yajna.
One odd side effect of this is that Indians for quite a long time were reluctant to buy refrigerators.
Yes.
We still, of course, now many people have refrigerators, but the refrigerator penetration is still relatively low in India compared to other parts of the world. And one reason for this is that many people just had this aversion to just keeping food. And I even know, there are friends, with more traditional parents, and you can go to their house and at most you will see milk in the refrigerator. But this is one reason why refrigerators took a long time to start in India. So you're right, people want hot food.
And somebody was just asking कि ये तामसिक खाना का मतलब क्या है? That which is stored, like achar, papad, anything which is stored for a long time was considered tamasic. Sattvic is fresh, organics, what we call salads and fresh veg.
Okay.
And the moment you add spices to it, it becomes tamasic. That's all it is. It's not so complicated. The moment you add spice to it and you lift the taste, it's not the taste of nature. It's not like a mix of salad. The moment it is salad, then it is, I always say, wo sattvic hai.
Okay.
Sattvic
so tell us, how does the jungle sustain us? Because, that seems such a contradiction. I mean, we know that the cultivated world, we plant grains and vegetables and the food comes, but how does the jungle sustain us?
So in the jungle, now imagine what is called foraging is happening, hunting is happening. Hunting, foraging communities are there. So the most basic communities that we talk about are the hunter-gatherer communities. And bear hote hain, jaise shabri ke bear. So there are berries that are consumed, there are fruits that are bought, there are flowers that are eaten, there are yams and what is found under the earth. So yam is important. This famous Rishi Panchami which happens, where everyone eats what is under the ground, right? So you have then you have fruits, so these are the things which are gathered, and of course animals are eaten, right? So you will eat the deer. The king goes hunting. Ram is always hunting in the forest. The Yudhishthira Pandavas are hunting in the forest. In fact, in the Mahabharata, there's a very famous story where the deers come. जो deer होते हैं, वो जाके युधिष्ठिर को सपने में आके कहते हैं कि please जंगल से निकलो, you are destroying our population. Right. So they would go from one forest to the other, allow the deer to repopulate, and then come back.
And in a funny way, I mean, while there are still many prescriptions against eating meat, many people in many parts of India, eating wild meat seems acceptable. There are many traditions where people eat boars, for instance.
Yeah, wild boar, comfortable with pig.
Yeah, they're not comfortable with pig, but people will eat wild boar. And actually, oddly enough, this is something we're seeing a lot in Goa at the moment, because a lot of people are just sitting at home and nothing to do. And actually, there have been many cases of people going out and poaching wild boar. Sometimes quite cruelly, they leave like these bits of food with explosive inside, and dogs pick them up and die that way. So but yes, these it's surprising how these traditions, these feelings continue. And I want to just explain a bit about Rishi Panchami, since you mentioned that. I mean, that's a really interesting festival that happens towards the end of the monsoon, right?
Immediately, the next day after Ganesh Chaturthi, na, Chaturthi and then Panchami, Rishi Panchami. The
Right.
fourth day,
Yeah. Somebody please mute your mics, please, because that's causing some thing. The main thing about Rishi Panchami from a food point of view is that this very interesting dish is cooked on the western coast, which is called Rishi Panchami Chibaji, which is basically foraged foods. I mean, you have a lot of wild greens like amaranth, what we call chauli or tamari baji in Goa. We have roots. You don't have chilies, which is interesting. For some reason, there is no tradition of putting chilies, and that's one sense in which the chili, as being a foreign substance, seems to have persisted. Does this appear in other places?
see, chili is also used for witches.
Oh, okay. So you think that's why
Could
that
be. I mean,
it
Panchami
could be.
things are given to the witch, to the
Okay,
goblin, to the ghost, to
okay.
the dark form of the goddess, the limbu,
Right,
kimchi,
right.
tamarind, uh,
Okay. All the sour, hot.
sour and
Yeah,
pungent
yeah, yeah,
sugary things.
yeah.
Also, see, when you're talking about when you're talking about food, one has to look at like, for example, you're talking about different festivals.
Right,
Rishi Panchami, you're eating the green leafy vegetables and tubers, but Ganpati Puja is basically the offering of leaves. Lots of
right,
leaves are offered to the god. 21 types of leaves are offered.
right,
Navratri, the goddess is worshipped with 9 wild plants.
right, right,
Then during Gauri Puja, a plant is given to the goddess. Then you have the the Shami tree, which is associated with many festivals. Many festivals, you're really worshipping plants. You're worshipping tulsi, neem, tamarind, uh, the wine. There
right.
is creepers are being worshipped. So many of it. If you look at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the seal shows very clearly there is a goddess coming out of a tree. तो एक पेड़ है, पेड़ के अंदर एक देवी है और उसके सामने लोग पूजा कर रहे हैं. It is the first record of ritual in India. The first, it's not this famous what is called proto Shiva, which is not proto
Right.
Shiva, वो आदमी बैठा हुआ है like a rishi. It is a woman standing in a tree to whom an offering is being made.
Right.
अभी अब बलि चढ़ रहा है उसको, तो
Yeah.
पेड़ का पूजा करना is from Harappa.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have every kind of plant being worshipped. So,
I mean,
these festivals, the offering of leaves and always wild plant.
Yeah.
Always wild plant.
One interesting one is, since we've just finished Diwali, it's always interested me how much Diwali is associated, with festival of lights. But before the advent of, candles and kerosene and oils, the oil that was used on the lamp was edible oil. I mean, like the mustard oil.
So till,
yes.
Rai ka til ka til. Now, til is very interesting. Til was exported from Harappa to Suneri.
Right.
Again, Safed til, Kala til. Kala til is given during Shraddh. Kala til is used during Diwali. So Kala til पितरों के लिए होता है, भूतों के लिए होता है. और सफेद तिल जो होता है, जो मकर संक्रांति में जिया जाता है,
Right.
is associated with the light. So it is literally, you can see the light and dark being used, the safed til and the kala til, which is used Uttarayan and Dakshinayan. So you can clearly see just a simple color playing the role of til, right? Til, safed til, Makar Sankranti, kala til, Diwali.
And oil is so much a part of the festival. We eat rich, fried foods, and we delight in it. It's not a bad thing. I mean, people seem to think that, have a bad image of oil these days. But actually, through most of human history, fats were greatly desired. They were great sources of nutrition.
The Sanskrit word for fat is sneha.
Okay.
Affection.
Really? Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. And it's really sad. I really find it sad. I mean, there are health reasons why people should limit their fats, but people have become obsessed about it. They see fat as evil, but in fact, the fats were not evil. And there are many festivals across the world, like Hanukkah and Easter and things like that, where fats are celebrated, and Diwali is one of them. I mean, even people have oil baths and things like that in South India.
On the Naraka Chaturdashi, you'll have an oil bath. So
exactly.
oil in India is very, very, because it lubricates, right? It
Right.
lubricates. So it's a very, sneha is very important in food. And you can't eat millets, ragi, unless it contains, and the gods are offered ghee, right? So you can't
Exactly.
say fat is bad.
Yeah.
देवताओं को आप घी दोगे पहले. So the earliest offering to the gods is ghee.
Yeah, and again, we are going down a major digression here, but I have to say that because this is something I'm really interested in. I mean, the processing of oil is very important in civilizations. Mainly because it's a messy process. I mean, whether you're rendering fat or making ghee. Well, people still make ghee at home, but rendering animal fats or crushing oil, which is what there is evidence of in from Harappa. Like there are
Yeah.
masses of sesame seeds. I mean, and it's one of the earliest things which is outsourced from the home. People still grind flour at home, but almost nobody grinds has an oil press at home. And oil presses are the gunnies are also, and so people there are many communities which specialize in making oil. Our prime minister actually comes from a community, the Ganchis, which in Gujarat were traditionally an oil pressing community. And these communities, they traded in oil, they got wealth through oil. I mean, oil and fat was a source of one of the earliest sources of trade and of trade and wealth. Um, okay, sorry. Now the major digression over coming back to the forest. Um, you have recently come out with a book, and I'm going to talk about it, which actually I have to say, this is the book, Aranyaka, the Book of the Forest, which you have done along with this really amazing graphic novelist called Amruta Patil, who actually is Goa based and is from Goa. And reading through the book, I can see many themes of the forests of Goa, almost intrinsic in this book. Now, Aranyaka is about the food and forest, and in a way, honestly, if people are not able to access this full talk, I would just say just go and buy Aranyaka, and nearly all the themes we're talking today are actually in Aranyaka. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and how you and Amruta came to talk about a book based on the forest?
So, as I said, one of the things that when I'm studying mythology now, it's been 25 years of writing on mythology. And one thing I noticed that all these big guys who write on mythology, on Indian philosophy, never talk of the forest.
Right.
They never talk of, they use words like prakriti and all that, but prakriti के बारे में बात नहीं करते, पेड़ों के बारे में नहीं बात करते, because ये mythology में आ जाता है. वो सब बड़े बड़े abstract concepts. They will talk about atma and sharira and all these very big ideas, ahankara, very psychological approach, and they use all these metaphysical ideas, but they don't talk about organic, real things like Mahabhuta, plants, animals, Agni, the pot, the ladle, the house, the cow, the tree, the fruit, the seed. The entire language which is used in mythology is very forest, very organic, and the relationship between the forest and the cultivated land is very big. What is refinement? शिव जी को आप कच्चा दूध देते हो, श्री कृष्ण को आप मक्खन देते हो, देवताओं को आप घी देते हो. So you see the processing happening as you move from Shiva to Vishnu to the Devatas. You see the shift happening. You see the, as I said, kala tel, safed tel. So the language which is used is so organic in food, like, and nobody talked about it. So I told her that all the rishis are always in the forest. So can we write a book and explaining this idea? So that was the original idea of writing the book on the forest. And then Amruta said that, we need a story, and she selected the story of Yagyavalkya. And I liked it. Suddenly I was more excited.
So can you tell us a little bit about the story?
There's one story in the Upanishad कि याज्ञवल्क्य बड़े बड़े ऋषि हैं, वो जनक सभा में जाते हैं, वो हमेशा जीतते हैं, वहां से बहुत गाय लेके आते हैं घर में, और जब घर लेके आते हैं तो उनकी दो पत्नियां होती है, एक मैत्रेयी और एक गार्गी. So two wives is Gargi. Sorry, Gargi is not the wife. In some books there are the wives, but Maitreyi and Katyayani. Or Maitreyi asked the question, will this cow give me the truth or satya? And he says, no, it will not give you the final thing. So she says, what will give me? He says, knowledge. And she says, I want knowledge, I will follow you. And Katyayani says, I want the cows. And generally, when you hear the Gurujis give these lectures, they will always say Maitreyi is superior to Katyayani, because Maitreyi likes the intellectual, while Katyayani likes the material. तो जो गाय के पीछे दौड़ता है तो inferior, and the one who is seeking knowledge, the truth, and this kind of romanticizing of knowledge and the abstract. But I said, why does Katyayani want the cows? Let's look at that. What is wrong with someone seeking cow, food, the material world? Because the material world and the spiritual cannot be separated. Prakriti and Purusha, you cannot separate. The God and Goddess is always shown together. So these monastic orders, you know that I have an irritation whenever I see these Gurujis, it just irritates me a lot. I find them very foolish people. But अभी क्या करें, लोगों को बहुत पसंद आते हैं, तो then I realize foolish people follow him also. So, but the thing is, because they are not talking.
But you always stop people from treating you as a Guruji.
That, I mean, what to do now? I mean, stupid people are everywhere. But the fact is that, Gurujis are one half of reality, right? There is no woman next to them. भगवान जब देवताओं की पूजा होती है तो वहां पे बगल में दाम्पत्य होता है, शिव के साथ शक्ति होती है, विष्णु के साथ लक्ष्मी होती है, गुरुजी के बगल में कोई नहीं है. सो ही इज इनकम्प्लीट, वो अपूर्ण है, अपूर्ण सत्य, अर्ध सत्य. इट इज जस्ट, एंड देयरफॉर द किचन, you see, we don't realize the kitchen is where everything comes together. That is why Annapurna becomes an important idea. कि अन्नपूर्णा महादेव को भी गृहस्थ जीवन में लेके आती है. So that becomes the most powerful space, the uddharane, the feeding of the others. So even the Babajis who had, like Sai Baba is very famous for cooking. The cooking pot of the peers, of these fakirs, of the Nath Jogis, they would always have this pot.
Swami Prabhupada of ISKCON was a very well-known cook. He was he made cooking a very central part of the whole ISKCON system.
Because you see, it is natural to Vaishnavism, because you are Bhagwan ko ab 56 bhog chadhate ho. So in the Nathdwara temple, 56, because every day you will give 8 dishes to the, there are Ashta Prahar, har prahar mein bhog, so 7 din mein 7 into 8 is 56. So 56 bhog, that is how 56 bhog comes. Every pahar you will give a different bhog, 7 days a week, 7 into 8, 56. That is the number of bhogs you give the Lord. Wow. So you have to cook so many dishes. It's about variety, you have to know, and everything is to be done with bhav. Every food must contain ras, swad. So the metaphors are used, ki rasaheen hai, swad hai ki nahi. Even when you're describing the sensory systems, they will say the sensory is indriya gochara. Your sense organs are like cows that are grazing grass in the pasture land.
Wow.
So the metaphor of food, eating, bhog is so central. Which we don't, temple, that's why temple culture. All these Raja Ram Mohan Roys of the world were ashamed of the temple culture. Arya Samaj, ashamed of the temple culture. So food was not important. The moment temple becomes important, अभी तिरुपति बालाजी में जाओगे तो वहां पे भोग, पूरी जगन्नाथ तो भोग, you go any मंदिर में जाओगे तो भोग,
own special food.
Food is the most important.
Now, one of my last digressions over here is that the difference between men and women cooks. And I'm asking this because it's interesting. While, of course, nearly all cooking, regular cooking is done by women, and it's a hugely unacknowledged role. But in Indian, history and mythology, there are 2 figures of male cooks who are sort of celebrated. Typically, I guess, that the male cooks are celebrated. One is of Nala, and one of the earliest culinary texts that we have is supposed to have been, written by Nala. And the second is a figure of Bhima, who, after the period in the forest, goes in disguise as a cook. Now, which is fascinating. Why is this man who's known as a wrestler, really strong, big, the warrior, why does he become a cook? And I'm going to break here because there's one of my favorite food songs from Indian film is this food song called Vivaha Bhojanam from an old Telugu film called Maya Bazar. And Reggie, can we just quickly play a little bit of Vivaha Bhojanam? And then we'll come back to. Okay, the song goes on like that. So why the male cooks? What is the importance of male cooks versus female cooks?
So it's very interesting that see in both the cases, the cook, when they become cooks, it is also fall from their high position. So भीमा जब वो वल्लभ बन के खाना बना रहा है, वो खाना पहले उसको परोसना पड़ता है, only then he can eat. The cook can't eat before others are fed. So here is a man, prince, who always used to eat food, everybody's food, and loved to eat food. उसको बोला गया है कि विराट पर्व में you will feed others and then eat yourself. So he is being brought down from his high pedestal. Nala is a king who has faced misfortune. He has lost everything. Everything. He has lost everything. Damayanti, he's so ashamed of himself that he runs away from his own wife. And he survives by doing his own skills, which he always had. One is horse riding, the other is playing games, and third one which he has is he's a great cook. So he cooks food for the king, and it's that food becomes famous, and Damayanti traces him through food. Wow. That's how the food is. He's traced through food, and then he's brought back through his skills. So this, you never lose your skills. Basically, the story is saying that you lose your fortune, but you can't lose your skills. So that's what it is. But you see, in Ramayana, Sita is considered to be a great cook. Sita is Rasoi. And Draupadi is considered to be a cook. So Draupadi ki thali, or rather she's more a host. She feeds a lot of people. Interestingly, Valmiki Ramayana, Sita is not a cook.
Oh, really?
This concept of Sita as a cook comes only in later Bhakti traditions.
So this whole concept of Sita ki Rasoi is not there in the Valmiki Ramayana?
At least I haven't found it. Maybe there is some version out there. But Valmiki Ramayana, there is no reference to Sita being the cook. And Mahabharat, Draupadi is not a cook, but she gets the pot, the cornucopia, which is full of food until she eats. When she eats, then it will stop. So she's the last to eat. So she doesn't eat. Everybody's fed. And but what happens is Sita ki Rasoi comes only in the 14th, 15th century. Because if you look at miniature paintings, there's a new book which has come called Turmeric Nation, which talks about this. And she says that if you look at miniature art, they always show Lakshman cooking for Ram and Sita.
Really?
Sita is never cooking for Ram and Lakshman. It is Lakshman who is cooking. He's killing meat, and he's roasting meat and giving them meat. Of course, now people will be horrified, but then they'll justify it by saying Rajput paintings, so Rajputs are okay with eating meat. But that's not the point. The point is Lakshman is doing seva. So he cooks for. And also in India, while we do this male-female thing is a very big thing, but remember, because of the menstrual rules, the women were not allowed to enter the kitchen during menstruation. Many men had to learn cooking. Because how to cook food? So that became a way that all men had to cook, especially in the Brahmin families, the men had to learn cooking. Because the woman is in her internment when she gets a child. Who cooks? Shraddha. Who will cook? Women won't cook. The kitchen fires are not lit. So cooking in India, at least in the Brahmin communities, the upper caste communities, and in the Kshatriya communities, the warriors who went to the jungle had to
learn how to cook. Right. No, there are all these like stories about, I've heard from my Tambram friends of like, during this period, the mother is sitting outside in the living room shouting instructions to the son inside, like, make this, make that. And you're right. I mean, this is because one of the few benefits, I suppose, if there is a benefit of the menstruation taboos, is that it did force a lot of men to learn how to cook, or hopefully just to appreciate the fact that they depended so much on women for cooking. So that brings us back to Katyayani. And so how did you and Amrita decide to make Katyayani the sort of almost the central protagonist of your book, Aranyaka?
See, my idea was that when you talk, like, for example, she's described as a woman with large appetite.
Right.
So we wanted to talk about a woman who enjoys food. And whenever you talk about, like, for example, when you look at the Rishika images, like, for example, there is this Karaika Lammayar or Lal Ded. These women are shown as long haired, shabby, scrawny, they don't eat, they have these emaciated bodies. There is no...
Explain the Karaika Lamma story.
So Karaika Lammayar, she was married and she worshipped Shivji, and she one day discovered that her husband had another wife. And she said, why is my husband having another wife? Because you see, the husband said, I can't deal with a wife who is so powerful, because she had magical powers. She could reproduce, she did a lot of magic because she had the grace of God. And she's relieved when her husband has another wife. She says, now I can focus on my devotion. And so that nobody finds me attractive, I'll make myself unattractive. And so she becomes very goblin and ghoul-like with a gaunt body. So Karaika Lammayar is this very gaunt body, बहुत ही भयानक, जैसे चामुंडा के जैसे, very very fearsome body, कंकाल शरीर है.
Isn't there one tradition where she cuts off her breasts and the breasts become mangoes, or this is something I've heard?
These are all the various lores, and she basically because the husband wants mangoes. He's hidden the mango.
Right.
So in order to get on the mango, she cuts her breast, and that becomes the mango. And he gives it, and he gets scared because he says, "Oh my God, if you can produce mangoes from nothingness, you are He gets scared of her, and she's almost relieved when he goes away. And so Karaikal Ammayar's story is about, so the food, almost food is an enemy of enlightenment.
I'll just add the one sort of a nice part of the story is that the part of the Karaikal festival, Ammayar festival in Karaikal, is that you present mangoes. I mean, there is a sort of little mango feast that happens as part of this festival. Sorry, back to
The mango. So this whole idea of the goddess denying her body, and when you deny the body, is denying food. So traditionally, this was how the tapasvis and tapasvinis were being seen. So we wanted Katyayani to be the very opposite: voluptuous, loving food, enjoying food, not just consuming, but also offering. So she's a great cook. She is cooking food, and because of her, there is almost a competition between Yagyavalkya and her, because the students love the words of Yagyavalkya, but the flavors of Katyayani give tough competition. Because the flavors sort of enter the classroom and the students can't concentrate because it's the flavors of food which is drawing them. So she is the temptress in the most, and she's food, and she brings these great dishes, and it's distracting. So he keeps saying, keep it simple. I don't want this expense. I want simple food. I want to eat. So you have this idea of sattvic bhojan, rajasic bhojan, tamasic bhojan emerging. How food is seen, because every day if you eat these chappan bhog which is offered to Sri Krishna, so wahan pe Saraswati kahan se aayegi? So can there be knowledge? So, Krishna Bhakti challenges this idea that you cannot have great food and great lifestyle and still not have... So there is this constant conflict between feasting and fasting in India. No? You feast and you fast. And in India, fasting doesn't mean denial of food. It means eating a particular kind of food.
Right.
हम लोग चना खाएंगे, हम गुड़ खाएंगे, हम साबुदाना खाएंगे. So this is not necessarily upavasa. Upavasa is abbreviated food. A special diet more than anything.
Why do so many upvas foods not include grains? So many upvas foods are about not including grains. You made foods out of tubers and things like that.
Yeah, so, anna is grain. Food is equal to grain. Everything else is embellishment around grain, which is very strange. It's carbs. but traditionally, food is bhat or roti. अगर भात और रोटी को तुम निकाल दोगे अपने अन्न से, तो जो बचा है वो उपवास हो जाता है. So that becomes the tubers and pumpkin and basically tubers. So radish, gajar, carrots, yam, tapioca.
Okay.
So that is what anna is rice. So not eating rice is a very big deal.
I mean, it's a bit ironic that, especially in places like Bombay, you have this whole genre of upvas food. You can have like upvas pizzas made out of like sabudana fat. So, I mean, it sort of like takes away the sort of idea of a fast, or at least modifies it considerably.
Fast is about discipline. It's about a disciplining of the food. Only the Jain traditions, it is about complete denial of food. So Jains are very strict about upavas. The way it is followed in the Jain tradition is very different. Right. Because Jain tradition, the body is rejected completely. It's the rejection of the body. And it is about attaining kaivalya. So you are trying to, austerity becomes important. So in fact, the stories are always about, one of the stories is this man falls in love with a woman. So the woman sends him an effigy of her own image. And he says, is this as beautiful as I am? But now when he opens it, it stinks because she's kept food. Every day the food she was supposed to eat, she's put it inside the statue. And the food rots. Yeah. And as it rots, it produces dirty smell. And he says, this is what I eat every day, which means my body is full of these rotting things. So how can you find it attractive? So there's almost a dismissal and rejection of the body in the Jain traditions.
Right.
Rejection. The story is quite an elaborate one. While in Hinduism, even the food of wastage, whatever you put in the garbage belongs to a goddess. Even that is a goddess.
Can you explain that? That's actually quite fascinating. I mean,
because what is you have decided that you will not eat the skin of a fruit.
Right.
But the cow will eat it, right?
Okay.
So Lakshmi is both. Lakshmi is both the pulp, the flesh, as well as the skin.
Right,
So what
right,
you throw away is also Lakshmi.
right.
So it is Lakshmi for some other creature. तो हर पशु के लिए हर तो इसको जिसको तुम अलक्ष्मी मानते हो, which is not लक्ष्मी, वो किसी और का लक्ष्मी बन जाता है. So
Okay.
garbage में there is what you consider as food. वो किसी cockroaches will eat it,
Right.
ants will eat it, rats will eat it. So there is लक्ष्मी का कई रूप होता है. तो लक्ष्मी doesn't see the differentiation that you and I see.
Okay.
She's food for everyone. So that idea is very important. The importance given to garbage. It's unfortunately we have lost that knowledge of the value of the garbage, and it's also organic, not plastic as garbage. This
Right.
is a post-industrial.
I mean,
Remember, all mythologies are pre-industrial.
People are trying to bring it back. I mean, this idea of segregating your garbage, composting your garbage, in a way, and many of them people who advocate this don't really realize how deep these principles are in India. But actually, you're right. I mean, separating your garbage, creating organic garbage, and composting, or in an earlier sense, feeding it to the cows, is a very ancient tradition in India, right?
Everything is consumed. Everything is organic. Everything is being consumed. So, when you're doing, for example, by the way, one of the most important Vedic rituals is feeding 5 people. They'll always say Pancha Yagya. And what is that feeding the 5 people? You feed the gods, really the plants. How do you feed the plant? You put water this way.
You're right.
You feed yourself this way. Then you feed your family this way. You feed the ancestors this way. And you feed animals by keeping food over here. That's how you feed birds and animals.
Okay.
So you're feeding plants, you're feeding
Okay.
animals, you're feeding the future generation,
Right.
the past, the ancestors, and yourself, the present.
Right.
So this is past, this is present, this is future. These are the plants that you plant, and even the sun and the moon. And then here you play birds and animals. Even if you're feeding the cows, you'll put the hand like this. So you have to feed everyone.
Right.
Now,
Right.
this concept of Panchayagya is just very simple. They make it exotic. Everybody likes to make these things very exotic and magical.
Yeah.
But it's really very simple. You have to feed everything. If you don't feed others, then how will you be fed? And again, comes back to the food as metaphor in Indian philosophy. Because our body is made of food. If you don't eat food, we don't have bodies. When you don't eat, what is left is the Atma.
Right.
The spirit.
One thing I really liked about your emphasis on Katyayani and the value of and the role of women and the work. I mean, the book is full of the sheer amount of work that Katyayani puts into the kitchen, and this is something I've written a lot about, because this is work which is often just ignored. And I'll come back to this example of the traditional vegetables. I mean, a lot of people have been talking in recent years about why don't we bring back jackfruit? Why don't we use banana flour? And as I said, there are times like during the lockdown when this actually was useful and very important. But there are actually also really good reasons why we don't cook katal and banana flour that often. And the answer is very simply: have you tried cleaning them? If you have tried cleaning jackfruit, as I was doing this summer, it's a hell of a pain. I mean, the sticky latex comes out everywhere. You have to keep oiling your hands. You have to keep washing your hands. You have to keep washing the knife. Cutting jackfruit is not easy. Similarly, cleaning banana flour is not easy. There is that each little floret has to be taken out, and there is one inedible part which has to be plucked out from hand. And it's very easy to say, we need to go back and get all these foraged vegetables. But are you going to be doing the cleaning? And one of the good things, in a way, I think about the way these vegetables are being recognized in the West is that there is actual value being put on the effort that goes into cleaning and cooking these vegetables. So many people say, why do we eat so many European vegetables? Why do we eat all these English vegetables, as they call, like cabbage or cauliflower, which most people don't realize have a tradition in India of less than 150 years. I mean, many of them was very specifically introduced by the British in the mid 19th century. And one reason why they were taken up so easily by Indians, by the women who were Indian cooks, is because they were easy to clean. They were easy to clean and easy to cook. So I think what is really important is that this book talks about the sheer amount of work that women put into the kitchen.
The whole idea of Durga killing the buffalo,
right?
Actually killing the buffalo because That's how food is cooked. Look at the act of cooking. No? It's pounding, then peeling,
Right.
cutting, smashing, roasting,
Thing.
steaming. These are violent
It
activities.
is the grinding. I know you that sort of grinding and the thing like that.
Pestle, pestle, and then grinding, and then smashing, and then
Thing.
mincing, and then boiling, and then
Yeah,
roasting, and then you don't want to be food because you'll be tossed and turned. And in mythology, in fact, when you see the cycle of Baal, one of the famous goddess myths is where she takes the demon and hits him on the threshing floor.
right.
So she uses the farming implements. So the act of farming is considered violent because it means cutting, the threshing, winnowing, and then pounding it. The dinky. The dinky is used to pound it. So they are all torture things which only women had to do.
Which only
So
women,
quite painful.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, there's a wonderful story called Patolerma in Chitra Banerjee's the Hour of the Goddess, where she talks about the sheer effort of grinding spices and that sheer labor that goes every day. Of course, now we have a mixie and we press a button and do it, and there is a loss. I understand there is a loss. I mean, because mixies tend to over process, and there is a sort of characteristic graininess that comes when you do it on a seal butter. But on the other hand, I'm not the one who's going to be doing a seal butter every day. And if I'm not the one, then I shouldn't complain about oh, you have to do it the traditional way. I want to talk here a little bit about temple kitchens. Going back and especially about the Jagannath temple and the kitchens, which are supposed to be the largest kitchens in the world over there. And the sheer volume of food that's cooked over there. And, this is a tradition that you are particularly familiar with. Can you tell us a little bit about these kitchens? For instance, in temple kitchens, are the cooks nearly always men?
Yeah, temple kitchen, the cooks are always men.
Okay.
The cooks are always men, and the food, nobody can touch it. Nobody's shadow is allowed to enter. So it's a very complex process because the food can completely thrown. If somebody by accidentally touches the men who are cooking before the offering is made, they will throw the food away. It's quite, they put these masks and they have to follow these very strict rituals. See, Jagannath is a deity who lives and dies, right? He has birth and he has death cycles. He falls ill every year. When he goes into quarantine for 1 month, it's called Anasara. So every month, Jagannath goes for quarantine.
Quarantine. Okay.
Yeah. 1 month.
Okay.
You're not allowed to see him for 1 month. When you go there, the temple doors are shut, and there are these, and no lights are switched on because it gives him headache. So only little lamps are lit outside so that you can get access, and there are paintings made of him. And the paintings age over time. So the early paintings have black mustaches, and as he grows older, the white colors emerges. And so it's a very beautiful process of life and death, and therefore food becomes important.
Okay.
So on one side is the kitchen, on the other side is the marketplace, which is called Anand Bazaar and the Bhoga Mandapa. So there is the kitchen which is there, then there's the serving place, and then there is the market, and the cycle of life is through food. So food really helps you understand samsara, the cycle of life. And that is what the Jagannath temples, that's why food plays such an important role in temple rituals. And remember, these are temple rituals were rejected by all the Hindu reformers.
Right.
All Hindu reformers, they wanted to make it a very intellectual religion, which even today, when you read, whether it's Swami Chinmayananda or any of these Swamijis, they're always talking about Upanishads. They never talk about Agama. The only person who talks about Agama is about inter-life faith, some rubbish like that. But generally, Agama rituals are about the god, Swarupa of the deity, who has to be fed every day. Naivedya has to be given, and as I said, 8 times a day in a Vishnu temple. In a Shiva temple, it's simpler. And therefore, kitchen is central to worship. The Panchagavya, the Panchamrut. So all this, the feeding, and again, for example, fish is very important. Not just, we have to be careful. It's not just vegetarian food. It's also non-vegetarian
Right.
food. In non-vegetarian food, there is the blood and the fish. And the fish is very separate because the fish, Machindranath, you offer it to, Shiva. Many of the Shiva temples, you offer fish because it's fertility, symbol of fertility. Shadi ke time aap pachi dete ho. So in Bihar, Odisha, Assam.
Why are fishes a symbol of fertility?
Because the fish, you don't have to farm fish.
Right.
Fish is always there.
Right.
The sea gives you fish, the sea gives you salt. So it's abundance. This was Sagara. Lakshmi's father is the ocean because he's always giving. He doesn't ask anything. You have to cultivate crops. But fish you don't have to cultivate. Now, of course, we have got industrial farming, but really you don't have to cultivate the sea, right? The sea is there. You go and you get the fish. You go and you get the fish every year. In the ponds, there's always fish. So it's the giver, the great giver. So he is the father of Sagara Putri Lakshmi. So salt is therefore sacred because he always gives you salt. He doesn't ask, you don't have to cultivate salt. Salt is always there.
That's why salt is part of the thing.
Yeah, so the goddess. So it's a very important part of the daughter of the ocean is salt.
Right.
So you don't, salt is sacred. Salt is used to remove nazar because it is the most powerful positive energy in the world is salt.
Right.
So nazar nikalne ke liye they will use salt. So we don't realize that everything has a metaphor in food. I mean, anything you tell me and I'll go back to food.
I mean, since I am in Goa and, the foundations of Goa are like fish and rice. Now, and anyway, when you were talking about the Puri temple, I was thinking about rice because there is this story that I've been told by somebody who's researching, I've mentioned this to you in the past, traditional knowledge and biodiversity, that among one of the offerings in either the Puri temple or a temple in somewhere near in Orissa is green rice, is paddy. And for paddy to be given as an offering every day of the year, you need to have, what that means is there is such a diversity of species of rice being grown around the temple that that there are enough varieties which will produce green rice right through the year. Now, I don't know if this has ever been proven or not, but to me, it's a fascinating example of how many Indian traditions link back to issues like biodiversity and organic food again, which are being important today. But also, let's talk about rice. I mean, this key importance of rice in Indian food. Why is a baby's first solid food that the rice? So can you tell us a little bit?
Amongst the grain, the rice is the highest because it requires two things. One, it requires the maximum amount of water.
Right, obviously. Right.
Water. So it is the premium crop. So ragi and all need less water. So it is seen as, in India, everything is seen in caste ways. So a Brahmin crop would be rice. It's the highest of the rice. One. Two, it is the one which is to be transplanted. So maximum effort and labor.
Right.
So a lot of labor is required. So therefore it becomes premium. It is the most sought after grain. Then comes, although wheat is the earliest to be domesticated by humans, but from China and the it comes from the eastern side. Rice comes from the eastern side. Wheat comes from the western side. So we have got both of them growing in India. But rice becomes sacred. So in the Rig Veda, it is Yava, it is barley, but it is as the tantric traditions take over, the temple traditions take over, it is rice. Rice becomes the most important thing. And in the temples, and then all the Pindadan hota hai, when you're giving the sacrifice to the deity, to the ancestors, you crush grains of rice because then it means loss of identity. And rice is easy to cook, right? You just boil it.
Right.
Although ragi you can do the same thing, but ragi requires less oil to, it's just grown.
Yeah.
It's seen as an inferior crop.
It's seen as a survival crop.
Survival crop. Then you grow ragi.
Or a crop of the marginal.
Marginal. Central will be, the highest of the things will be rice. Rice will be given a lot.
Okay. Just one other, food that I want you to talk about, because it's a food that's becoming increasingly important in India, but one which remains oddly controversial despite the fact that it actually originates in India. And I'm talking about chicken. Now, chicken descends, all chickens across the world descend from the Indian jungle fowl, which is native to the northern parts of India, the north and the northeast. And all chickens in the world have originally been descended from this, and yet India and chicken is by far and away the fastest growing meat in India. Eggs are also becoming really hugely important, and yet it's something we seem to find a lot of discomfort with. At this, I've been told many strange stories. Like I was once told by a poultry seller that you should only buy colorful chickens, because if you buy white chickens, they are often, egg-laying chickens which are just being like reused. And if you buy black chickens, they're often like chickens that have been meant for sacrifice and have been taken away, are being reused. I mean, this is one really odd piece of advice, but I was given to it in all seriousness by a chicken seller. So which was a reminder to me that chickens are actually also used for sacrifice. And one of the most common things is sacrifice, and yet
lower, not the higher gods. The high gods are given. Even there, is it the goat that is given? Is the lamb that is given, or is it? So there is a hierarchy in that. The goat being the highest because it's the independent mountain goat.
Right.
So Prajapati's head is the mountain goat.
Right.
The chicken is given to the goddess and is considered to be because the chicken picks worms from the earth, so it's considered inferior.
Because it's a scavenger.
Scavenger. So it's seen as wild scavenger. And therefore, and you're right, the black commodity is used to give to the goddess and it's used for black magic.
Okay, I mean, so this is the curious fact that, I mean, the chickens went from India. They went through Southeast Asia. One of the theories is that they were used for chicken for cockfighting, actually.
Cockfighting, yes.
Again, and that's an important and very cruel way of like using chickens, but and it's slightly controversial. So it's again one reason why chickens were not seen as part of a lower tradition, as opposed, thing like that. And they went to the east, but in India, until relatively recently, chickens were simply not actually considered.
The village goddesses. So Thayyam performances, you will see the cutting of the Thayyam gods, which is there in the southern in Kerala.
Right.
There, the chicken plucking of the chicken is given. The chicken is even, I don't know if you've seen in Bombay, there are many rituals which are done on the railway tracks.
Really?
Yeah. They do these railway track offering to the railways. It is
railways.
Not on the low path. So they will do it there and they will offer chicken.
Okay.
It's considered to be black. I mean, they call it black magic, but basically these are the old tribal tantric practices. We don't know what they are, but basically there were various rituals that are performed, and chicken plays a very important role. Bakra is slightly higher, so it's this male bakra, khasi dinner. So the goddess is the Durga Puja and all. You'll give even bigger. You'll give the buffalo. So buffalo is at the top of the pyramid. Never the bull. The bull is not considered an important sacrifice because the bull was useful as a bullock, as a draft animal, but the male buffalo had no use. It was useless.
Right.
So sacrificing the male buffalo is the topmost. Then comes the goat. Then comes the chicken. Chicken is much.
Okay. What role do coconuts play? I mean, this is
substitutes. They're substitute sacrifice. Pumpkin, and then also clay images, they also make images using flour. So you make animals made of flour, especially in Calcutta and all, you will see these animals made of flour which are offered. So substitute, कि भगवान को मान के इसको हमने बलि माना है. So in India, symbolic use of metaphor is very important in India. We can, like now Ganga is polluted, so you can just take a Bisleri bottle and say, isko Ganga ji maan ke kar lo puja. So you can see anything as anything.
Okay.
It's not a small thing, it's a metaphor. And metaphor is used a lot in Indian thought, in pujas. So pujas, you'll do, like, if you don't have something, the priest will say, okay, you just get this. And he'll say, I see this as a cow and offer it to you. I see this as a horse and offer it to you. So you don't really need, so you can use the betel nut to do it. And the betel nut is again crushed and cut. So these are all substitutes in India. Over time, we substituted everything.
Okay, I mean, we can go on for a long time, but we should start tailing this off. So I'm just going to talk about ask you to talk about one or two more subjects. One is about the importance of fire. Okay, and now obviously fire is a huge subject that can go in many ways. But I'm just in particular, I was reading Aranyaka, and I at one point she talks about the difference between fire in the hearth and fire in the forest. Yes. And how fire means something very different in the forest, which is actually, to me, a very interesting comment because, again, when we think about jungles, we tend to have this idea of this lush, tropical, wet, rainforest jungle, which exists in India, but in very few places, like the Sundarbans and places like that. Where the jungle of central India is a very different jungle. It is a scrub jungle. It is a dry jungle. And it is a jungle where fire can, in fact, be devastating. Maybe even fire has a role to play in the jungle. I mean, so can you just talk a little bit about fire and the jungle?
So the jungle fire has no boundaries.
Okay.
So you light it, it just spreads in every direction. But the moment you create a hearth, your first thing is you dig the soil. And so you contain the fire. So boundaries are created.
Okay.
The boundary is the birth of civilization. The moment you create a boundary, civilization starts. So the first hearth is also a sign of humanity, the first human. But with the kitchen fire, it becomes different, because with the kitchen fire, the hearth then gradually becomes a kitchen fire, because you use clay on the sides, you're containing the fire, you're using wood very carefully, bamboo, cow dung fire, which is gentle, soft, takes a long time for the food to cook. The women would just put the dal and the rice, and they'll go take a bath. By the time they come back, the food is ready. So it takes a long time to cook. So the kitchen.
I just want to say that this is actually a really key point. I mean, which a lot of people from outside India don't understand. I mean, about a year back, I was part of this TV show called Ugly Delicious with this, famous Korean American chef. And, he was asking me a lot of questions about Indian food. And the one thing that I said, which actually finally got through, and I think he started understanding Indian food at that point, is that I told him that, you have to understand that cow dung for centuries, was the critical source of heat. I mean, we don't have coal. We do have coal in the north, but the history of use of coal in India is actually very limited. It actually starts around with the British period. And firewood, yes, it was there, but then it had to be people had to go and collect it, and it was not always available. But cow dung was always there, and cow dung produces a very slow heat, as you said. It's not a high heat. And so you can't do things like stir fries and all that, things like that. Ovens also are a relatively new sort of invention. Our basis for food is cow dung. And for cow dung, what works is the pot, and what works is boiling. So slow boiled food is the essence of Indian food.
The bagar on top, the final
touch is put on top,
just the last, that chunk
right.
down. So you cook boiled food, you smash it, and then you add. That's how food is cooked. The wok being used as, which we do it now, is only special occasion, fried food. Because then you need oil. And cow dung is easily available. It's in the house. The woman of the house doesn't have to go out to fetch wood in the forest. Right. It's there. You have the cow in the house. It's going to produce massive amounts of cow dung the whole day. So you have enough and more of it. And and also the cow dung is used for various rituals. So it has other things, other rules, uses. So these little details. So fire. The third fire which emerges is the lamp fire. Right. Of the lamp, which is contained with oil, with a wick, and that is a control fire. So from far away, a man can see whether it's a forest fire, whether it's a fire, it's a dhunni of one of these babajis, that Nath yogis, which is a lot of smoke. Then there's the lamp fire, which from far away you can see a lamp has been lit in the village. So they'll say in the evening you put a lamp so that people know where civilization is. So in the forest, travelers can see, there is a house there where you can take shelter for the night. That is why the evening lamp is so sacred. It's the only reason, no magic about it. It's just to tell people that there is civilization here. If you're lost, come home, we'll feed you. And wealth is shown by many lamps. You have a lot of money. You have just a lot of money. And so at least once a year during Lakshmi Puja, you try to, because when the harvest has just happened, there's a lot of oil in the house. You have the Lakshmi. You are showing off your wealth. And that's when you do the Annapurna festival. There's a lot of food in the house. So it's not, oh my God, they will try to make it everything exotic and magical. It's just simple.
Practical.
They're very practical things. These are farmers. They don't have time for exotic explanations. They have to survive.
Yeah, no, to me, I mean, this is why I think a lot of what you're saying resonates, because I've always found the simplest explanations work with Indian food. I mean, people love, making stories and anecdotes, and in a way, I suppose that's part of it. I mean, it fulfills a certain need for people to tell stories, but the basics are also important. And so, as I said, we have had this whole discussion. We've covered many things. We could go on for long, but actually, I think this book, which I think is a truly remarkable book, a collaboration between. Is this your first collaboration with someone that has gone as deep as this?
Purushottam Agarwal, I've done the Padmavat book.
Okay.
Padmavat book, I've done the introduction and the illustrations for that. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of collaborations. They'll be coming out now in the next 2-3 years.
Okay.
So hopefully one with you.
Yeah, well, let's see. And so a lot of the stuff that we've talked today about being nourished by the jungle is actually covered in Aranyaka, a collaboration between Amruta Patil, who is Goa-based, and Devdutt Pattanaik. And Devdutt, thanks very much for coming and talking to us at such length today. And tolerating all my many digressions, but those are actually the most fascinating parts of any discussion with you. There was just one song that you wanted to you suggested that we play.
But do we have time for questions? I think it's very late.
I think we have a lot of appreciations, but many of the questions actually we have tackled as it like.
Song.
Yeah, I see. So just explain about Paklo and this song and why it's important to you as an Oriya.
So the thing is, in Odia, the Pakhala food is a very important thing which is eaten in summer. So it's just it's like pantabat. It's a form of kanji and pantabat. It's across India, different forms exist. In Odisha, it's like almost a magical thing because it's soaked overnight. The rice is soaked overnight and you eat for lunch. So it's slightly fermented. And I thought this song, which is a very traditional Odia song, about what you eat with Pakhala, and it also affects the affection of the house. Although I grew up in Bombay, far away from Odisha, with very little, I was familiar with the song. My mother would sing the song, and I grew up with this memory, and how food again is used as a metaphor for love and affection.
Also, I think what Paklo tells you is that food is not wasted. I mean, it is extra rice. It is extra rice. Sometimes the things that go with it are made from peels and for forage foods and things like that. Somebody has before we play that song, one last interesting question has come up, which again, Khyati Arora says, is there anything about veganism and plant-based food in mythology, since it's gaining so much relevance today's time? Now, this is actually touched on something which I both did and didn't want to talk about. One is because so much of acrimony in talking about food in India, gets caught up in this veg, non-veg discussion. And to me, this is unnecessary because clearly, as you've brought out today, when you look at the traditions, there is evidence for both being for all kinds of food.
Animal is a very artificial separation.
Yeah.
In mythology,
at the same time, I also find it a bit annoying when people go to the other extreme and say that any talk of vegetarianism, it has to be like with a political agenda. And the fact that vegetarian food is being used for a political agenda, which it is to some extent, doesn't mean that the value of vegetarian food disappears. I mean, when the rest of the whole world is moving towards vegetarian and plant-based food, I think it's a matter of great importance that we do have such an evolved vegetarian cuisine. So to me, the polarities of this discussion I find deeply annoying.
Universalism. See, most people don't understand diversity, and that is the biggest learning in my 20 years of writing mythology. The biggest thing is people just are so self-absorbed that they assume that their dietary practices must be universal, or their ritual practices must be universal, or their belief systems must be universal. So my ego is so inflated that it assumes that my taste and my desires have to be universal.
Right.
But the nature is designed around diversity. In fact, nature is made of eaters and eaten. Everybody's eating something. The Eskimo eats a very different diet from the person who lives in the Amazon forests. The Amazon for the Africa, if you're living in near the Serengeti, your food is going to be different. If you're living next to the sea, your food is going to be different. If you're living next to the river, your food is going to be different. You in post-industrial times, your food is going to be different. If you're rich, your food is going to be different. If you're poor, your food is going to be different. Universalism is an absurd, egotistical idea, and you find this in politicians, you find this in activists, people who want to change the world. Universalism is evil, because it just rejects nature's diversity. There are different kinds of food. There are healthy diets, there are unhealthy diets. We are ultimately going to be food. Somebody's going to eat us. Fire is going to eat us. The worms are going to eat us. So food is there in diversity. You can't, what the tribal man sitting in the middle of the jungle is going to eat. He's going to eat his chicken, he's going to eat his rat, he's going to eat his locust. You don't eat it, but you are not him. As Katyayani discovers in Aranyaka, when her husband says, I don't want to eat your rich food. I know you're cooking it out of love, all this food. I don't want to eat it. I just want to eat the simplest possible food once a day. And he's the other extreme. He says, I don't want that my energies to be used by food. I want my energies to be focused on studying. So in the household, there is a difference between her and her husband. Two different worlds emerging. So I think this universalism is just the expression of ego in its worst form.
Yeah.
Everybody has a right to eat whatever they wish. And in a post-industrial, we are living in an industrial society, unfortunately. And therefore, the food manufacturing processes are horrific and destroying the planet. But it's industrialization. Right. It is not the food itself. It's industrialization. Whether it is our agriculture has become industrial. We are destroying crops. We're destroying soil. Animal husbandry has become industrial. Fishing has become industrial. Cooking has become industrial. So everything is industrial. So it's not just one meat industry which is industrial. I went to America and I was horrified that all the farms that I saw, none of the corn there was edible.
Right.
I was like, oh, so much of farm. Let's go and eat the makkah. And my friend said, you will die.
Yeah.
It's apparently used for
it's used for ethanol or for corn syrup or things like that.
Beautiful. I thought it was like this one of those Hindi films where I could go in the farm and eat the makkah. And they said, no, you will die. Yeah. So kilometers of that's plant which is being destroyed. So rivers are being destroyed, sea is being destroyed. So that's industrialization.
Yeah.
And we are not going back to being hunter-gatherers. So
this is where I think, the Indian traditions do have a lot to say, because somebody has just asked us, Latachari just asked a question. Plant-based food has been very expensive. It's been marketed as a very exotic food and difficult to obtain. Actually, we talked about this earlier in the discussion when we talked about jackfruits and how jackfruit is being marketed in the US as this really expensive exotic fruit, whereas jackfruits grow like pretty much for free. In India.
It was a poor man's food, which has become too expensive for the people who grow it. They can't do it anymore. So it's industrialization which is making things absurd. And we're thinking of the ideal food and universal food. These are absurd ideas. Food, the Vidur Sag. Vidur Sag is sag which grows in your house. It is just green, leafy vegetables. Because Vidur refused to eat the palace food. He said, I will not eat the palace food. He wanted to assert, he was the activist, the original activist who wanted to assert his independence from his brother. Although he lived with his brother, he said, I will not eat your food. And I will eat only the green vegetables which grows in my backyard. So it's called Vidur Sag. And Krishna, when he comes, he refuses to eat palace food, saying that this is bad food because you don't share it with your brothers. I will not eat a food which you don't share with your brothers. I will eat Vidur Ka Sag. Vidur Sag is a very important concept. So in India, you grow in the ground, you grow on earth. Vegetable gardens were there everywhere, not just in India, around the world. So, but it requires a lot of work. You have to work. You have to do all the work. Now it's so much more easier to just order on Swiggy or just buy from, as you said, jackfruit, clean karke dikhao. You'll go mad if you're doing all the cleaning. So the process these are very difficult things to manage. And if you're wanting to save the world by deciding what food you're going to eat, best of luck.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to end this. A few more questions are coming up, but I don't think we really have time to go into these. But we can always. Devdutt is extremely accessible. I have to say, if anybody has any questions, write to him on his website, and he actually responds. He usually responds by by directing to something he's already written about in the past, which is a testimony to how much and how long you've been writing about mythology. You know, the way you're talking about the importance of valuing diversity is actually something that really, I guess, Thus Critique is all about, because this is exactly why Thus Critique exists, to encourage these discussions and encourage new perspectives. And so, Devdutt, thank you very much for coming and being with us today.
Song. Let Reggie
Yes,
play.
and we will end by playing your Power song. And as I said, Aranyaka by Amruta Patil and Devdutt Pattanaik. If you want to go back to any of the themes we have discussed in today's discussion, just pick up a copy of Aranyaka. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Devdutt.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I don't know if we're going to get the song.
Are we getting the song?
Yeah, it is.